Welcome to Unlapped. It's back-to-back race weekends. This time we're headed to Monaco as F1 continues to dominate headlines both on and off the track. Katie George, Nate Saunders, Laurence Edmondson. Let's get right to it. Boys, you're on the ground in Monaco, near Monaco, in Nice, France. Where exactly are you, Laz?
Yeah, in Nice, which isn't too far from Monaco. But the roads here, especially around race weekend, are very small, and there's a lot of people that want to use them to get to the racetrack. And so, yeah, it's not too far as the crow flies, but as the car gets stuck in traffic, it takes quite a lot of time. But hey, look, it's a great place to be. You know, south of France is where we are. Monaco, of course, is its own little country along this coastline, but it is stunningly beautiful. The sun was out today. I've been here for a couple of days because I came straight from Imola, got the train through Italy and into France. And I think Nate just arrived today. Is that right, Nate?
I have indeed. Yeah. So I got the similar train, which is amazing, actually. I mean, you just basically go all the way down the coast. You go through Italy, France, and you're briefly in Monaco for a bit, and your phone signal drops out because you have to get different network supplier when you're there. Then you're back in France again. So it's pretty interesting. And I was in Maranello for 2 days between Imola and here, home of Ferrari. So I've had a pretty cool week. Something I think we can probably talk about more in an off week, kind of what that place is like, because Katie, you've got to get down there at some point. I know Laurence has been there for some F1 launches. It's my first time properly. I'd driven through it once and very briefly stopped, but just one of those places you always hear about. It's kind of talked about as this kind of fabled mythical place, and it does fit the billing for that. It is amazing. So yeah, pretty special few days. And actually, I think this is the last race for a little while, other than at Silverstone, where both Laurence and I will be on the ground. There's a few coming up where one of us is doing it and the other one's back at base. So end of a little era here, because we've had a good little run of races where we've both been at.
Yeah, you have to savor it for sure. It's interesting, before we came onto the podcast, just for Americans to kind of understand the lay of the land, Laz, you said if you remain out in Monaco, say you go out to dinner or you go out with some friends tonight, to get a cab ride or just a ride in general back to Nice, which without traffic, you said is about half an hour. You said that would cost about $200. Is that correct?
That's pretty much correct. Yeah, the taxis know they're onto a good thing here. And also Uber, I don't know whether it's a law or whether it's just the way it is. I assume it's a law in Monaco. You can't get Ubers. So you have to do the old-fashioned picking up a taxi from a taxi rank or whatever. And you're in competition with quite a lot of people who probably are not staying in Monaco either, and quite a lot of people with quite a lot of money. So naturally, the market corrects itself, and the supply is very restricted. The demand is very high with a lot of people with deep pockets, and therefore you get these absurd taxi bills if you're looking to do it. So I wouldn't recommend that. However, there are other options. Of course, you can rent a car. That's what we're doing. That's probably the most guaranteed way to get from A to B around this part of the world. Or you can take the train, and I think the train costs something like €2 or €3, so $2 or $3, and you get the train from Nice to Monaco. However, the train,
you have to trust the French train system, which is the one drawback.
And they love to strike, and they also know that a strike at this time of year is particularly impactful on people's lives and Monaco and everybody trying to move around this part of France. And so occasionally a train will just go missing from the schedule. So my other bit of advice, if you ever find yourself visiting the Monaco Grand Prix and you're not staying on a yacht or in one of the fancy hotels, is never to get the last train back from Monaco. Get the one either 2 or 3 before, just so you know where you stand with the train leaving. So that will curtail your evening fun time somewhat. But yeah, it's all part of the kind of fun of coming here. And of course, there's lots of people here with so much money that it doesn't matter. They either get their $250 taxi back to Nice, or they're staying on a yacht or in the Hotel de Paris or somewhere else for thousands upon tens of thousands of pounds or dollars or euros.
Who's driving the rental car? Because those roads don't seem forgiving. They look tiny as hell.
Laurence is driving this weekend. Well, to be fair, we're both going to put ourselves on the insurance. I think I drove at Imola, and those roads. I mean, literally, there's one of them which is a Roman road. It is as straight as an arrow from Imola all the way back to Bologna. All you have to do is occasional roundabouts, which for a lot of American listeners is probably panicking them, because I know you don't like your roundabouts too much. But even they're in pretty short supply. Here, I'm not sure I've driven this race. I'm trying to think if I have or not. But yeah, the roads are. There's a few that I mean, it's a great place to be a passenger because you spend so much of the drive from Nice to Monaco with your neck
Looking.
flipping left to right. If you're driving, obviously you can't do that so much without. I mean, I'm not very good at that. If I turn my head, the car moves with me, you know. So I think Laurence, having me said that now, we might not visit the rental center to put me on the insurance now. But
And there's
no, I
some
mean, yeah,
steep cliffs here as well. You don't want to
yeah,
be, yeah, taking a wrong
really
turn
steep.
anyway.
But this has an amazing. I mean, when you get to basically the border between this side of France and Monaco, you have this unbelievable drive down, and you get the views of the harbor that you'll see on the TV broadcast, and it is unbelievable. You know, it's one of these places that you drive in, and it's I quite like the contrast of the F1 calendar. You know, we've gone from Miami a few weeks ago, big football stadium. You know, very big event. We just went to Imola, which is kind of this like tiny circuit in the middle of Emilia Romagna, and then we go to a place like this, which I think if you tried to put this race on from scratch now, it'd be very difficult to do it, just because of how kind of absurd it is. So to actually drive down there and see that is yeah, it's one of the high points of the season in terms of traveling to all these races. There's lots of high points, but this one hard to be disappointed or upset when you're seeing that every day.
Well, just know I don't feel bad for you, even though you're staying 30, 45 minutes away in Nice. I'm very jealous. It's certainly a bucket list item that I want to get to. It's the Monaco
We'll
Grand
have to
Prix.
get you here next year, Katie.
I know. I would
Tell
absolutely love
the
it.
college basketball's done. You know, everything's. I know the NBA's still on, but hey, quick
I'm
trip to
available.
Monaco.
I'm
Yeah,
available.
quick. Easy,
Well,
right? Quick trip to Nice.
yeah.
You're back in a day. Easy.
Okay. Hopefully our bosses who are listening will be like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. Why didn't we think of that
Yeah,
sooner?
yeah.
We'll certainly break down the race, get you ready for it with a preview. But I first want to start the show with a little bit of a quote that I found fascinating. It took place before the Imola Grand Prix. Zak Brown, McLaren's team principal, he was on the Beyond the Grid podcast. And he said, I think there are 6 or 7 drivers on the grid who would be world champions with the Red Bull. As great as Max is, I don't think he would win the world championship in any car other than the Red Bull at this point. Okay, I have a couple of follow-ups, but first and foremost, Laz, do you think these comments are fair?
I do, insofar as the Red Bull is a huge part of the reason why Max Verstappen has had this sustained success. Now, if it's 6 or 7 drivers up against Max in a Red Bull, then maybe not, because I think Max would have that extra little bit. And, you know, it would be fascinating to see Lewis Hamilton in the same car as him, Lando Norris in the same car as him, you know, and see what would happen. But if you look at the way he's able to drive that car and on the limit, then yes. Now, if we're talking about a theoretical scenario where Max has taken out the Red Bull and somebody else is dropped in of that standard, so be it Lewis or Lando Norris or whatever, yeah, I think that would be the case. And then look, you know, we kind of have proof of that as well. The Mercedes domination era, you know, Lewis Hamilton was winning season after season after season. Max Verstappen would win the odd race. And this is, you know, Zach hasn't said he, you know, other drivers wouldn't win races, or clearly are winning races anyway. And so when, yeah, Lewis had the dominant car, he was winning championships. He no longer has the dominant car. He's no longer winning championships. So I think this is kind of like pointing out the obvious to some extent. And would Max win in any car that isn't the Red Bull? Absolutely, he would win races. No doubt about it. He'd be able to do the kind of thing that Lando Norris did in Miami. You know, I think he'd capitalize on situations left, right, and center. But would it be enough to win a championship, which is what Zach's talking about? I don't think so. Not if somebody else of you know, of a high standard was in the Red Bull. So if it was a straight swap, Lando Norris in the Red Bull, Max in the McLaren, I think Lando Norris is going to win the championship at the end of this year. So that's my opinion. So I saw this quote as well, and I saw it get a lot of heat on social media. I don't think it's necessary to say, you know, I think there was a little bit of him saying it, knowing it would get a reaction, but it's hard to disagree with
Who,
him.
Zak Brown? Would he do that?
Yeah.
Surely not.
I think he's been in full piss off Christian Horner mode as well, hasn't he, recently? So, you know, he was saying that Newey had been handing out CVs had been dropping in left, right, and center from Red Bull. But I think Laurence is right. I mean, if we could probably count on one hand, right, the amount of drivers that you would make that swap. If you're a Red Bull, you say, right, you're losing Max, but you can take any other driver on the grid. Lewis, Fernando, you definitely would switch them at a drop of a hat. Then I think the next two, you've got Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris. obviously have both won races, but we probably haven't seen enough from them in title winning cars. But I also feel like they haven't had that opportunity fully yet. You know, Charles, Ferrari all fell apart in 22. Maybe Russell. You know, I think that's, you know, I don't know. I feel like Russell of those three is probably at the bottom of that list. Then,
And just to be clear, of these names you just listed, those are names, drivers you think if they were in the RB20, they could win a world championship this season.
no, I think Laurence is right. I think a lot of drivers could go in, but I think if you were to be honest about the discussion, if you were Red Bull, those would be the five you'd want to replace Max with, for the reason being that I remember. So when I grew up, a big Schumacher fan, I had a lot of friends of mine who'd say it's just the car, it's just the car. Then when Vettel was winning, people said it was just the car. When Lewis was winning, it was just the car, etc. And I've always made the point to people that say that the car in Formula One is obviously a huge deal, but if it was just the car, then Formula One would be paying a guy, Red Bull would be paying a guy like me. They'd say, look, we're going to pay you £100 a week. Go sit in that car and just turn the steering wheel, and you'll win the championship. And it's not as simple as that. You know, you need to still have the best driver and the best car. And we're seeing with Perez, you know, the pressure that can come with having a great car. Obviously, in his situation, he's got a great teammate that's kind of, you know, knocking him back a bit at times. But I think that to actually win races with a great car is still a difficult thing because you have the pressure, the expectation that you should win it. So I think those are the five guys I would say you would definitely put in there. Then you've got some fun left field ones. Alex Albon, it would be great to see him in a car like that. Like Yuki, we're seeing him tear it up at the moment. How would Yuki deal with a car with a situation like where he's expected to win a championship? I mean, would we get the old Yuki that's kind of, you know, flipping his lid every 10 minutes? Would we get the new Yuki that thinks about it before he hits the radio? You don't know. So I think I agree with Zak Brown, but like to Lawrence's point, that's always been the case with Formula One, and the driver is still the key difference maker. So I think that a lot of people saw that as like a real insult to Max, but I think actually the point he's making is we've got a very talented field in Formula. Well, at least the point I would make would be we've got a very talented field in Formula One right now. And yeah, there's a few guys that could step in there and do this same job. Whether they could be doing it as well as Max, I think that's probably where we need to talk about it. You know, he's had this run of consecutive poles. He's had all the wins over the last few years. Would any of those guys be able to do it as well as Max? I think what we've seen Max do is kind of reach that level where he's so good, so confident that he's hit that stride of just almost unbeatable form. Obviously, we've seen some holes in that recently, but I'm not sure if all those guys I named would be as dominant as this. But again, we won't know. It's a great hypothetical, and I'm sure someone else could come back and just disagree with everything I've said, which is the nature of a hypothetical. But yeah, I think if you boil down the quote to what he said, spot on. You know, five, maybe you could throw a name or two other. Maybe I'm missing an obvious name that I haven't said there. You know, you've got like Sainz and Piastri. Like, could they do it? Are they just actually, you know, good drive? I think there's a difference between great drivers and good drivers in F1. So it's a good debate. And yeah, I think Zak, I didn't see the interview, but I imagine when Zak said it, he had a little grin forming on his face as well.
Little smirk. Well, as you mentioned, it was another impressive weekend for Max Verstappen and Red Bull and Imola. You two were both there to witness it. I did think it was interesting watching Lando almost close the gap to Max at the very end. Overall, kind of seemed like somewhat of a straightforward race, not a lot of drama, not a whole lot of excitement. But do you think if there were a couple extra laps, Lando would have been able to close the gap, or do you think it was too far gone?
I think
one more lap's what he needed.
Yeah, but it's also it's a bit like the Zak Brown theoretical thing. It's utterly pointless because if you had a couple more laps, the cars would have run out of fuel, or they wouldn't have had enough for a fuel sample because that is the length of the race that there was. And of course, Max, I think, you know, in the final 10 laps, realized he was coming under pressure. And if we want to talk about why Max Verstappen is such a great driver, this might not be the obvious example of it because he didn't win by 20 seconds as he so often does, but he was able to realize what was going on, manage it, drive in a certain way whereby he wasn't giving Lando DRS. He wasn't allowing him to get close at points where he was going to be vulnerable, managing the battery pack, which, you know, we heard some concerns about that he was relaying over team radio. So that was a bit of him and his engineer working together to make sure that they had power in the right places to defend from Lando. And all he had to do was get it to lap 63 and, you know, it's okay. It's done. He's made the finish and that's it. And so this kind of theoretical 2 laps, it's like, well, yeah, could have, but maybe Max would have done something slightly differently in the previous 10 laps, which meant he had that little bit more. So we won't know. But what was exciting is that Lando had the pace to really close down that gap in those last 10 laps, to go from roughly 6 seconds when Max looked like he was cruising down to 0.725 as they crossed the line. That was impressive and is very good for the upcoming races. And to go link it back to that Zak quote again, one of the things that Lando was saying after the race is that actually now, with the way the cars are, how competitive McLaren have been at the last 2 races, he thinks it is more about the driver than the car. All of a sudden, the drivers are going to make the difference. And you might do that in qualifying. He was, you could tell, slightly upset that he hadn't quite found that extra tenth of a second or whatever it was, tiny bit more of him, I think, to get pole from Max. Because had he got that, then it would have been an entirely different race again. And he probably would have won from the front. So, we're going to see that, especially Monaco, where we're going next. Drivers just being brave, just taking that a little bit closer to the walls. If the cars are all within a couple of tenths of a second of each other, that's the kind of region that drivers can start to make up. Or if they're about that in the race, by some clever tire management, which is exactly what Lando did. He was very, very careful with his tires at the start of the second stint, which meant he could attack at the end. That is a real skill that he was able to showcase. And so, hopefully this is a sign of things to come. But if there was an extra 2 laps, sure. But I think probably both cars would have run out of fuel at the side of the road.
You know what I'm hearing in Laz's answers today? Enough, Katie, with these hypotheticals. Just asking questions. Not here for it.
In the middle of that, my TV in my hotel next to me just turned on. So I think they were inspired by what they were hearing from Laurence and his answer. It just literally I was a bit spooked by it because it came on a very specific channel that looks a little bit like me, actually, just talking into a microphone. So maybe it's a glimpse into the future. I just wanted to follow up on that, because I think one thing that's really stood out, and the point about drivers is great. And I think what's been really exciting to see of the last 2 races, and it's not to say we haven't seen it before, because Lando has raced like this previously, but it's been 2 great showcases of one of Lando's really, really his strongest traits, which is that ability to just sit back on his tires in the middle of the race and just let the race come to him. He did it in Miami, and the reward was a safety car that came out at the right point. He just started to kind of get the most out of his tires and start pushing again. And then at Imola, what was remarkable was a couple of laps before that happened, he was saying, "Oh, Charles behind me is really quick. How's he so quick?" And suddenly, out of nowhere, Lando's car came alive. So I think to Laurence's point there about drivers making the difference, we're starting to see what one of the big strengths of Lando Norris is in these situations. And he now has a car where doing that and kind of just letting the race come to him and trusting that the pace will be there at the end is something he's going to do, and something he's very good at doing. And where McLaren is right now, that's quite an exciting thing to think about, because clearly in this race, it put him right there. I think one of the issues we're going to have, I think we've got a lot of races at the moment where as soon as Lando got into that 2-second window, he found it very difficult to keep that progress going. I think it's going to be a real test of these cars if we keep getting close battles where 2 cars can't really get close to each other because their pace is so close and the DRS doesn't make enough of an impact. So we'll see if that is the case. But a lot of reasons to be excited, and I think for me, the whole temperature of the season has changed in 2 races, because suddenly I think Max is still going to win the championship, but we've suddenly got a situation where we've got this competitive order behind that we just hadn't seen, and Lando is kind of at the forefront of that. And actually coming to this week with Ferrari talking about these next couple of races should be strong for them, that's also great, because we haven't seen Charles Leclerc win for a while. They've got the whole Monaco curse storyline we can talk about and run wild with. So it's shaping into a really, really nice season for the storylines, the drama, and just seeing something different out in front.
Last question I'll ask to put a bow on Imola, and we can move forward. What did you guys make of the decision, or I guess George asking for Lewis to give his position back after he was called into the pits, and Mercedes not obviously adhering to what he was asking for, Laz?
So I understand why Mercedes made that call. I think they were a little bit jumpy. One of the main reasons they gave was that they thought Checo Perez was going to catch up, and they felt that if they pitted George, they had enough time for George to get new tyres on and come out ahead of Perez. Now, if they'd waited a little bit longer, Perez would have closed in enough that George would have come up behind. So they had to pit him up that moment. So it's either do it then or don't do it at all. And by doing that, all of a sudden you've got a buffer to Lewis in terms of somebody with better tyres being able to hold off Checo behind. And you have the benefit of a driver going out on new tyres, which means almost certainly, as George did, you'll get the fastest lap. So you don't lose any points as a team because you're just swapping your two drivers, but you get the extra bonus point for the fastest lap. So that makes sense. But, fragile egos are involved when you go racing motor cars. And clearly, if you listen to George's radio, he wasn't happy about it. He was happy with the idea initially. Then he said, but will we swap the positions back? Which is something that we often do see. And he was told before he pitted, no, that won't happen. And then there seemed to be a period where he didn't want to pit. And eventually he did. I think just at that point where it was going to get a bit too late if he didn't. So, I think Mercedes did the right thing. Afterwards, George said, look, I'm not going to sulk about it. I'm just going to deal with it. But I think he was quite keen to get across to everyone that he had the upper hand over Lewis over the course of the weekend, both in qualifying and the race. And it was only this decision that had dropped him back. And then also when you looked at the final finishing positions of Lewis and Perez, the difference between the two of them, I don't think Perez was ever really getting close. George pitted and pulled away from him and George didn't catch up with Lewis. So yeah, maybe they could have swapped it around, but there is also this concern, I think, sometimes where teams, when they start to get a little bit too clever, when they start to tell a driver to back off, especially with the way the tyres were going, a lot of the issues in Imola was with tyre wear. The problem is when you lose the physical rubber off the tyre through wear, it becomes harder and harder for it to retain heat because you need more of that bulk mass to retain the heat. That's what generates the heat within it. And so you can quite quickly lose a lot of tyre temperature. And if you're slowing down and losing lots of tyre temperature, then there's potential that even a driver like Lewis Hamilton makes a mistake. So I can kind of see why they did what they did. At the moment, it doesn't matter. Neither of those drivers are going to fight for a world championship this year. Sad to say, but I don't think anyone would disagree with that. So it was a case of maximizing that extra point for the team. I think they owe George one at some point when it comes down to it. If another scenario plays out and it makes sense to do it again, I think they certainly owe George that the other way around. But I think we probably won't hear a huge amount more about it again.
Do they consider that? You think they file that away of oh, we kind of screwed him, or oh, let's get him back here? Do you think they really consider that?
I think when there's another decision along those lines, it's going to be very hard for Lewis to say no if he's the driver that's losing out. So I don't think they'll go out of their way to manufacture a situation where George gets his 2 points back or whatever it was. We're only talking like 2 or 3 points, whatever it is. I don't think they'll go that far, but what they might do is, if there is a situation where, say, George is looking a lot quicker behind Lewis, this happens with teammates all the time, and the team gets on the radio to the lead car and says, look, your teammate's faster than you behind, let him through. So I'm sure there's lots of Lewis fans that are screaming now saying, well, that's never going to happen because George is never going to be that much faster than Lewis. Possibly true. But if it does happen, I think Lewis can't really have much of an argument against it now that, George clearly took one for the team, as it were, and got the extra points. So I think a similar scenario, or a scenario where it doesn't make sense to keep Lewis ahead of George, they'll look to swap it, as they probably would anyway. But I just think Lewis will have less ground to make an argument, having already benefited from it at this race. Having said that, Lewis wasn't aware of, if you listen to the team radio of Lewis, he was not aware of any of this happening until George was behind, and then he was a bit surprised by it as well. So Lewis wasn't crying out for George to pit, come out behind him and save him from Perez. It was a team decision that both drivers then found out about as they were racing around the track.
If you were George though, he must have been tempted to get on the radio and be like, guys, I'm staying at this team. He's driving. I think that's where drivers' heads can get to sometimes, is that stuff. But I was going to make that point at the end. I think this is one where the decision was made on a fairly sterile environment compared to a race car. It was on a pit wall, bit of discussion, bit of data goes into it. But yeah, we've heard it before, haven't we, with drivers when they go, guys, I've done this before. It's my turn to do this. So I think we'll hear that at some point. And it might not even be in a race. It might be, I don't know if they're sharing a tow at Monaco or something. George might be like, well, hang on. Hey, I think I should get 2 runs at this instead of 1. I don't know. These drivers have very, very long memories when it comes to certain things, very short memories when it comes to the mistakes that they've made. But stuff like this, George Russell's going to remember that for a long time.
It's a very, very good way to describe it. All right, let's look ahead to Saturday, because this is the best Saturday on the calendar. Is Saturday more exciting than Sunday, Laurence? And is that a problem that we look forward to quali more so than sometimes the actual Grand Prix on Sunday?
It is more exciting because you've got a short lap with massive potential for error and drivers absolutely on the limit in cars that are way too big for the circuit. I think Nelson Piquet used to liken it to riding a bicycle around your living room. I asked Daniel Ricciardo, like, if there's a modern version of that, and he's like, yeah, it's a bit like a dirt bike through a supermarket now, or through a shop. So yeah, it's they're really on the limit. They're coming really close to the walls, and that's what makes it so thoroughly enjoyable to watch, because it's so easy for them to make a mistake. And then there's also that factor, which we've seen a number of times over the years, is that if one driver does crash and red flag the session, then not everyone will get their laps in. So you have this decision: do you go early and make sure you get a lap, and how important it is to make sure your first run in Q3 is good, or do you wait a little bit later, hoping that the track conditions are going to be at their absolute peak, but you run the risk of somebody causing yellow flags or a red flag in front of you and you lose your go altogether. So there's all these things going on that are really not entirely unique to Monaco, but they're heightened in Monaco, so heightened by just how close the walls are. And then, it's like anything in life. You have the highs and the lows and the good bits and the bad. And by having a circuit like this, which is so exciting for qualifying, it doesn't lend itself to racing on a Sunday. Is that a problem? I don't think so whatsoever. I absolutely love Monaco. I think it thoroughly deserves its place on the calendar. I can't think of another racetrack that's come on that is as extreme as Monaco, in just its own weird, quirky way. And I don't think there ever will be again, because as Nate said, if you propose this race now, everyone would laugh at you and they'll just say, well, it's not doable. You can't get the whole F1 paddock into this little corner of the south of France. You can't have 2 meter wide cars running around a circuit, where they have to change their steering angle for one specific corner, the Fairmont hairpin, where, they don't have to have their steering set up like any other track anywhere on the calendar. But this one corner, they have to, change things to make sure they can get the lock on the steering to get around the corner. All those kind of things I think are absolutely fantastic. And look, if you get a dull race at the end of it, fine, but you don't always get a dull race. Rain has an impact on it. Safety cars have an impact on it. It's just a different way of appreciating it. So I don't think it's a problem. But I know, since I've started this job, I think the overall perception of this race has kind of, people don't like it as much as they used to. People are upset about it. People seem to think that you need to have like wheel-to-wheel racing at every Sunday in the season, forgetting the fact that actually that doesn't happen at most races anyway. But it's just because it's so unlikely to happen here that people seem to pile in on it. But as far as I'm concerned, the moment F1 stops racing in Monaco, it's going to lose something incredibly special that it will never get back.
If Max gets pole position, it'll be a record 9 poles in a row. First off, that would be an extremely impressive record to obtain. He'd also need his teammate Sergio Perez to get through qualifying without wrecking, before Max can get his time in. That's an absolute stray bullet to Sergio Perez that he does not deserve. Okay. But the fact that it's at Monaco, will it make it more difficult to get pole, Nate, for Max Verstappen?
Yeah, 100%. And I think for all those factors that Laurence mentioned, a crash ahead, whether your teammate does it intentionally or not, other drivers have had to deal with that in the past, including Max. Lewis, of course, was convinced Nico Rosberg had crashed 2014 intentionally. Michael Schumacher did do it in.
Do they do that? Is that true gamesmanship? Like, is that a legit claim to make?
Yeah, I mean, most people. So, I mean, my first year in the past coming from one was 2014, and so 4 or 5 races in was Monaco that year. Rosberg, Hamilton. And then Rosberg had this weird crash down at Mirabeau, which is the kind of just before they turn right towards the hairpin. And I think most people, I mean, Laurence will be able to tell you haven't been in the paddock at the time, but I feel like most people thought it was kind of an unchecked professional foul. It was kind of because Lewis was behind him starting a lap, and that actually was a key kind of cornerstone of that rivalry developing into something a lot more toxic than it had been. And Schumacher did it in 2006. He parked up at the final chicane and actually got a penalty, which if you look back at that season, probably cost him, in the grand scheme of things, could have cost him an 8th championship. So they definitely do it. But yeah, and Max has had some moments here himself. He's crashed. I think it was 2018 was when we were like Red Bull are going to get pole. He crashed out. Danny Rick went and won the race. So still, and a really nice quirk to it. We'll come to it in a little bit, I know. But McLaren are running a Senna livery this weekend. How amazing would it be if they kind of kept Senna's record intact by getting pole in the car, running these Senna colors that we're going to talk about, and kind of denying Max that. As a journalist, I was like, that's a cool story. So we'll see if that happens. I did just want to quickly, I wanted to quickly come back to the point you asked Laurence about earlier about the circuit. Because I actually slightly disagree with Laurence about it, if that's all right. I don't want to mess up the run plan that Quinton, our
We
producer,
love
put together.
dissension
In the ranks. So
give us dissension.
I've always struggled with Monaco, not because I don't like the race, but I think that we've got it flipped on its head. We all know that the best part of Monaco is the Saturday. And, you can make the argument that you qualify and then you have to convert in the race. But I think Monaco is such a special occasion. Why don't we just have something different for that? And having points for qualifying or something like that, really heightening that day even further. I would love to see it, even if it's, if it's fewer points, whatever. Like, I'm sure people say that's gimmicky, etc. But there are so many Monaco Grand Prix you turn on, and you're just kind of like, okay, there's nowhere these guys can go. It was always the case, and you can get dramatic. You can get any F1 race can be dramatic with a safety car, but on individual merits with nothing else in play, it's often just cars following each other. Visually, spectacularly, there's no doubting that at all. And Laurence is completely right. If you lost Monaco, if you lost what that meant to Formula One, then I think you would lose something. But I also think it's a fair point to discuss how do we kind of make that weekend stand out. You've got so many races now. Vegas has kind of come in as this race that can now say, well, visually we've probably got one on Monaco, or in that similar level where it's not the same visuals, but it's as like, whoa, how did they get this race pulled off? And the first race we saw there was pretty good. So I don't know. I think it's a discussion to have. But qualifying, one of the laps I always go back to watch, and I would encourage anyone wants to finish listening to this. Robert Kubica, 2010 onboards, who was driving for Renault. In fact, those cars in that era were just all amazing. But just the way those cars used to be able to take the chicanes coming into the swimming pool, you could hear like the as they came through. It's still great to watch an onboard now, but 2010 and the decade before that as well, some incredible onboards of Monaco, and that really is just that's where Monaco stands out for me. Is just that Saturday, like you said at the top of the question, Casey, best Saturday on the calendar by far. And yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame that it's, and I use this lightly because I don't think it's what I'm meaning to say, but quote unquote just sets the grid for the race, if that makes sense. Like it feels like a one lap kind of time trial in Monaco means more than driving your car around it for 64 laps, or I forget how many laps we have this weekend. 64 is in my head because that's what we just had what we just had at Imola. So yeah, and again, you can say like, well, driving around that many laps in Monaco is a big challenge. It is, but if you're looking at it from the spectator point of view, less so. So I don't know. I think it's a good time to have a discussion about how does Monaco change. But ultimately, I think if you were to say there's 5 races you've got to save, I would take the hit of saying, yeah, this is a bad Sunday race, and just say this has to stay. Because you can't imagine, it's like Ferrari, right? You can't imagine Formula One without Monaco. You can't imagine Formula One without Ferrari. And both could do with being improved. Both could do with, having some things changed. But fundamentally, they've still both got to be there. So I think Laurence is.
Are you following the rundown for once? Are you giving me a proper segue to a Ferrari conversation?
Yeah. Sorry, I saw the run and I was like, I've got to give Katie some rope here. So back into Ferrari because I've just completely like run roughshod over it. And I think Laurence is going to come because I saw Laurence smirking at a few things I said.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, qualifying is that important because if you start from pole, unless you get something wrong or there's something happens and then you actually get a good race, you kind of do get the 25 points right there. So by getting pole position, like you are, that is actually worth almost 25 points, as long as you're.
So then why have the race? Why have the race then?
Because things can still happen. I mean, we can say that.
But that's what I mean. I think if
every race we turned up to last year with Max, he's on pole again. Why have the race? Well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like we should probably just go through it. Anyway. And it did feel like that at times. But with Monaco, I feel like that qualifying is super special. Whether you could have a different, like you could have more like single lap qualifying or something like that, or there could be a separate, one of the practice sessions could be turned into another form of earning points or whatever. Yeah, maybe. But I think actually even the practice sessions are weirdly exciting to watch, because you're just watching drivers build up and build up and build up. And, you see the lap times, and this is probably the nerd in me talking, but you see the lap times come down a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And then you're like, oh, how far can you push it? And you can guarantee over those 3 practice sessions and qualifying, somebody's going to crash. There's going to be an incident at some point. Now, you don't want to see a nasty crash or anything, but that's what makes it so enthralling, is that risk reward. They're kind of pushing that a little bit more, and then you'll get those super slow-mos where they're so close to the barriers.
Yeah, like kissing it, basically, aren't they?
Yeah, but also, like, if that's the way you feel about it, and I know a lot of people feel about it the way you do, you could just say, well, watch qualifying, except that's the end of your F1 weekend, and then don't bother watching the race if you feel it's a waste of time. But if it's a good one, you can watch like the highlights later on or something like that on ESPN.
The thing is, I'm paid. I paid to sit and watch, which is a good thing to be. But I do know quite a few people that will do that. They'll watch qualifying, and then they will, if the grid is good, they will make a decision based on the grid whether they want to watch it, rather than based on, I want to watch the race. So, but actually interesting to see how, like, if viewership does drop off from Saturday to Sunday. I doubt it is huge, but
that's where I disagree. I think the minority of people would watch Saturday and then not follow up on Sunday. I think that there's not necessarily change that needs to be made, because Saturday is so exciting and because this race is so unbelievably iconic, right? It's intoxicating because so many people can't afford to go. They'll never get to go to Monaco to experience this in real life. I don't think that people shy away from watching on Sunday. I think it's one of the most watched Grand Prix of the season. I think our ratings would back that up because of all the glitz and the glam and the notoriety that comes with it. Regardless if you get a boring race or not, I think people are still watching. So I don't know, if they ever did have a massive drop-off in ratings on Sunday, then maybe I think you would consider, well, what do we do to rectify this? But as of right now, I still find, as a fan, both days to be unbelievably exciting, and I watch from start to finish.
And what I will give it is, I always talk about how Jeopardy is important for, not the game show, I love the game show, but Jeopardy to make a great race. And Monaco has that literally everywhere. So that side of it, you're absolutely right. Every lap, to both the points that both of you have made, a driver is one slight millimeter away from changing not just their race, but also bringing out a safety car, hitting another, whatever it is. So I do get that point of it. It's just a shame that you get Saturday and then it's almost like a deflation of the Sunday. But maybe that's just me, and I'm happy to be in the minority on that one, because hopefully more people enjoy the whole thing than don't.
Maybe you're speaking it into the ether, and now we're going to get an unbelievable.
Yeah, we'll get the greatest Monaco Grand Prix of all time. We can clip this up and say, look how badly Nate's taken.
Your TV turned on randomly to scare the.
Yeah, it didn't when I was talking, so obviously hates what I'm saying. When Laurence is on, flash, straight up.
Okay, we're going to get back to Ferrari. I don't know how to do a better segue than that. It's the home Grand Prix of Charles Leclerc, the Monegasque driver. I don't think we need to drudge up all the heartbreak he has certainly had at this Grand Prix in particular, but it seems like, Laz, maybe Ferrari is a bit below their standards in terms of their qualies as of late. Like, what do you attribute that to? And do you feel like they can kind of turn it around here, and Monaco in particular, given the magnitude of what this race is and what it means to Charles Leclerc?
So Ferrari went into the season knowing that their big weakness last year was in the races. They actually had a very good qualifying car. So I think if you look at the areas they've looked to make progress, it has been very much on making this car a little bit more benign, easier to drive, less on the limit. But in doing that, sometimes you can take a little bit away from the raw performance. Plus, if you're focusing on that, you're not necessarily focusing on just putting more and more downforce on the car, which ultimately is the key to a fast qualifying lap time, efficient downforce. So lots of downforce, but not giving away too much drag on the straights. So, clearly they've had their targets this year. And of course, we all know, as we've just been talking about, you get your points on Sunday, not on Saturday. So I think it's a good way for any team to develop their car. There's no point in having a car that's super quick over a single lap if you throw away all the points in the race. So I think that's a bit of it. But I also just think it's, that is just how competitive F1 is at the moment. We know the Red Bull started this season a good chunk ahead. And it's been up to the other teams to catch up. And I think, the update that McLaren have brought to the car in Miami has made a big step, and probably bigger than your average update on any other car would bring. It's a big chunk of time. And Ferrari is just upgrading their car in a slightly different way. I think there was rumors going around that it's going to be 0.4 of a seconds faster before Imola. Now, if it had been that much faster, it would have been on pole position. But talking to listening to some of the drivers talk afterwards, the two Ferrari drivers, they said those numbers were always absurd. It was never going to be, no one makes 0.4 of a second anymore with a single upgrade. You're looking at 0.1 of a second, and then you're chipping away, and then you're refining your setup and making it easier for the driver to drive so that they can then get an extra tenth out here and there. And it's that kind of steady chipping away that eventually gets you towards the front of the grid. So I honestly don't think they're far off. And it seemed Imola was not a circuit that suited their car particularly. Whereas on paper, it probably was quite well suited to the McLaren. So you might see a bit of a shift back that way as well. And then when it comes down to it, if you're going to back someone to put everything on the line and grab a car by the scruff of its neck and take it within millimeters of the wall, Charles Leclerc is your man. So I wouldn't put it past them getting pole position here. But this is the great thing about this weekend going into it. We know because Red Bull have just been a little bit shaky at the last two races. They've had some issues trying to get the car set up the way they want it. They've had to raise the ride height in Imola, for example, to deal with the bumps and the curbs. Well, there's quite a few bumps in Monaco as well. So if they're then coming out of their comfort zone with where they're positioning the car above the circuit, and how that underfloor is working, and having to compensate with bigger wings and stuff like that, which is what they were doing in Imola. Of course, everyone runs big wings in Monaco, but whether they're just out of the comfort zone, if that happens again in Monaco, then all of a sudden that's really hard to claim back if Ferrari or McLaren hit the ground running. So that's my hope, that we get a super competitive session. And I think after first practice, you might be able to look at it and have a pretty good idea of which way it's going, certainly after second practice. But right now, I don't think even the teams would be 100% confident that they can go there. Even Red Bull and Max Verstappen wouldn't be 100% confident they can go there and get pole position.
And worth noting that McLaren's going to look a little bit different this weekend on track. Nate, you alluded to this earlier. They unveiled their Ayrton Senna inspired livery. It is yellow with some blue and red and a couple other colors, paying respects to Ayrton Senna's heritage, being Brazilian. I think it was stellar. I love the livery. I don't know what you guys made of it.
Yeah, so I went to McLaren actually last week, and we saw it. Kind of, they had an embargo on it. In person, it looks unbelievable. Then when you see the renders of it, I was like, oh, it's not the same car I saw, but they did have a picture of it in the tunnel in Monaco. And I think around that circuit, it's going to look fantastic. I mean, I love when teams go all out with the livery. I think it looks great. I'm a big fan of the color rush that they do, and I love all the NBA throwback jerseys they have. This is a good lesson to other teams. If you're gonna tease a different livery, you got to go all in. And what McLaren have done quite cleverly with this, if you look really closely, the front wing is actually still papaya. So they've kept the actual color, and then it goes back into yellow. It's very subtle, and you can actually see it when you're up close to it. And I think that's helped them get around some of the rules that they have in terms of what percentage of the car you can change. But I think they also did it just to stay true to that. But obviously we had the kind of I don't want to say debacle because it was only about a paint job on a car, but with Ferrari in Miami, everyone wanted to see it go blue, and then they had basically just the livery that they had. If you're going to tease something, I think a lot of McLaren fans were hoping it would be the white and red that McLaren used to drive in the late 80s, early 90s. But I think if McLaren couldn't do this, and I think quite early on they were like, we can't go for that for a bunch of different reasons. Let's go this way. They've gone all in and they've made a different car. Now, some people might love it, some people might hate it, but I think the fact that they've gone all in on it, thumbs up from me, definitely.
I love it. To your point, it's one race. Like if you're going to do it,
Yeah.
go all in and make it something great. Don't half-ass it, which is what we've seen. And what is it in McLaren last year that made a big to-do about Monaco's livery? And then we were all like, wait, what is this? It felt
Yeah,
flat. Was it Monaco last year for McLaren?
think so, because they had that great golf livery from 22, which looked fantastic, the old golf racing colors. Then I think you're right, Katie, that last year they were like, we're going to do something.
You
And
were the
then,
one who said on the podcast it was horrible.
yeah, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, you're right. Because I remember being like, what's this? Like,
Now
you've
I'm
gone from
making you
golf to
say it
this?
again.
Yeah, yeah. But no, so they've gone great, awful, great. So they've redeemed
Yes.
themselves. But that's a great example to my point as well. Like, you can get one-off liveries wrong. And if you are just doing it once, just, you might as well just like go all in, like we've been saying. So I'm not sure if Laz is the biggest fan because we talked about this on WhatsApp. I don't know if you changed your opinion
What?
on it, Laz, or if I just dropped you in
I-
it. But either way, explain
No, that's
yourself.
fine. I've yet to see it in reality. So I'd like to think when I see it, it will look cool. Also, I like the idea that we have a bright yellow car in Formula One. Like,
Yeah,
that
they're good
a
colors.
bit of like really bright colors on the grid look good. Yeah, I just wasn't sure. It really, I felt like, I don't know, I felt like they could have done more. And it reminds me a lot, and this has been said on social media as well, of the 1992 Benetton, or there's the 1992 one, 1993 one, around that era, where it was yellow with a blue stripe over the nose and then like green side pods.
Years ago.
McLaren isn't quite exactly the same, but it looks pretty similar. So yeah, it's a funny one, but I'm sure when I see it in real life, I'll make my final decision on it. But yeah, I didn't quite like it. And I think the reason they can't do the red and white, which I would love to see, because when I was growing up, that's the colors a McLaren should be, day glow red and white. And of course, that's the color of Marlboro cigarettes. Marlboro cigarettes are owned by Philip Morris, and one of McLaren's current sponsors is British American Tobacco, which is a big rival for Philip Morris in the tobacco, increasingly vaping world. And so I don't think BAT would have been happy, perhaps, and a bunch of other sponsors may not have been happy with a cigarette packet going around the track again like it used to back in the day. But hey ho, I have to say, I didn't, when I first saw the renders of last year's one, which was orange at the back, white in the middle, and then a black nose cone, I thought, oh, that looks, I don't like it. Like, it looks messy. It doesn't, like, it's not coherent enough. Saw it in real life and liked it. So yeah, I'm holding off my judgment until I see it either tomorrow in the pit lane in various different bits, or just on Friday when I see it on track.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
And I do like the if you actually, so you can't quite see it from every angle, but the Senna is written across the rear wing, which I think from camera angles you should be able to see, and on the front wing. So they've done it as a tribute. It's great. I think people are maybe on. I think I've actually seen a bit of interesting discourse about a lot of people saying there's been quite a lot of Senna stuff over the past few weeks. But if you're going to do it, and what was interesting, McLaren originally planned to do something at Imola. They felt it just wasn't the right place to do it because they thought, Imola's where he was killed. Monaco is a race he won 6 times. He's very famous. I think you associate Senna with what he did in Monaco. So that's why they kind of shifted it back 1 week to do that. But yeah, I think they made the right call because, it just fits. It's just an easier story to tell, I think.
You know what also fits? Somebody hitting the trifecta a week ago in Imola.
This guy.
Let's give you a round of applause. It's
Thanks
the
very much.
first trifecta that's been hit this season. The trifecta means you correctly predicted P1, 2, and 3, which you did.
Yeah. Yeah.
You believe that Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, and Charles Leclerc were going to be on podium in Imola. So you not only got the 3 points for correctly picking those guys,
I
you
got
an
bonus.
extra point. So now, having gotten 4 points, I'd like to add that I got 2 points. Lads, you got...
Yes.
Okay.
Which did you picked Max
and Lando.
and then Charles and Lando?
I don't remember who I picked third.
Yeah,
Anyhow.
I think maybe you went Perez. I think you put Perez on there, maybe.
No.
Or Piastri,
Or
maybe.
Piastri? Maybe Piastri.
Maybe Piastri.
We're all incredibly disrespectful to Sergio Perez with those predictions. He's very rarely in our top 3, the poor guy.
Maybe we're gonna get to those predictions. But total scores have been flipped on their head. Okay, so currently as it stands, Nate, you're first with 9 points.
Oh.
I'm a close second, 8 points. Laz, you are in third with 7 points.
What a
Therefore,
turnaround.
what a turnaround. I know.
I was
Won't
dead
last
and buried
long,
a few
buddy.
weeks ago.
You were.
Dead and buried.
This just makes me really happy because I feel like we're in for a really good season. Laz, I'll start with you. Podium predictions for Monaco. Podium predictions
Okay.
Saturday. No, I'm just kidding. Sunday.
Yeah.
This is tough. Are we still doing it where we do third place first and then?
I guess you guys
That
make
was
it hard.
unpopular last week. But then I did it and I won. So maybe I'm going to stick to that.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to go with that. So I'm going to say Norris in third place, Leclerc second, and then I'm going to try and win back some points with Max winning the Monaco Grand Prix. I'm not certain about it all. Like I was saying earlier, I think this is genuinely wide open, probably more than most races. But yeah, Max, when he needs to, he can sometimes do special things. So yeah, I'm going
Not
with
to put you all on the spot, but you guys are like encyclopedias. When's the last time Charles was on podium in Monaco, or has he ever been?
I don't think he has.
I don't think he has.
I was looking at this earlier.
Okay.
Something has always happened to him.
Here's what happens if you pick somebody other than Max to win, it just forks your whole podium prediction. Because then like Max isn't going to come in second. All right. I say all that. I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to go Max Verstappen.
Oh, love it.
I'm really going for this. I'm feeling real confident in my second position here with 8 points. Max Verstappen, P3. Norris, P2. Charles Leclerc wins the Monaco Grand Prix. How sick would that be if that actually happened?
Love to see it.
That would be so good. So good. So good, in fact, that I'm going to steal a bit of what Katie's been smoking, been drinking. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to say, with my newfound arrogance and confidence being ahead, I'm just going to throw caution to the wind. I'm actually going to say Norris third, Max second. I was thinking maybe don't put Max on the podium, but I do want to at least give myself a chance. And then Charles Leclerc first. I think this is the year we reverse the curse of Charles Leclerc at Monaco.
You think it's possible, Laz? Based on what you've seen from the Ferrari, you think that he can get it done?
Yeah, genuinely do. I really do.
Doesn't think it enough to back it though, Katie.
Well, no, I'm just trying to.
He's in last now.
He's he's overthinking it now. He's overthinking. He's going with his head.
I'm last. I gotta start playing safe, right? I mean, that's how I had Leclerc, Sainz, and I think Norris as the top 3 in Imola. Obviously, didn't go very well. So
that was brave.
But the Ferraris made progress. I think it is possible. Will it happen? Maybe not.
Last thing before we go, lads, you've got a great article on ESPN.com right now about the best places to watch the race in Monaco. If you could pick one place from your research to watch the race, money aside, of course, where would it be?
When we talk about Monaco, money really has to be aside, or you've got so much of it that it no longer matters. Having done this research, I looked at yachts, I looked at hotels, I looked at different terraces around and about. I think for the ultimate Monaco experience, it's got to be a yacht. But also, I think you've got to pick one that's close to the track, so you can get that, that real feeling of how close the cars are going to the walls, and the energy involved as these cars go through the corners. So yeah, if you could get a yacht somewhere around the swimming pool chicane with a good view of that, there are a few little mooring places. There's not many. It's very exclusive, but one of those would be great. I also came across this party that has 9-liter bottles of champagne. I say I came across, I haven't been to this party, but I was researching it. And they have 9-liter bottles of champagne that take 4 people to open it. So 4 people come along in some kind of big ceremony. I'm not quite sure how and what they do, but because it's so big and heavy, it takes 4 of them to open it. So basically, whatever your wildest dream is of a Formula One themed party in Monaco, it can happen. You just need to spend the money. And the amounts of money, this is probably the most interesting thing about the article, is just the numbers involved to get some of these spots just to watch a motor race. Usually they have some good food and drink involved as well, but still the numbers are insane. So yeah, take a look at it. It's an interesting piece.
Well, if you want something more economical, a little bit of everyday, if you will, although Las Vegas is still outrageously expensive to attend in November as well. The F1 Arcade is always a good place to watch a race. So F1 Arcade, I don't know if you guys saw this, will be opening its largest venue in Las Vegas at the Forum Shops at Caesar's Palace for 2025. I've never been to an F1 Arcade before. Have you guys?
I
I've been
have.
once. Yeah, I've been
What are
once.
they
I went to
like?
the one in London. Very cool. I mean, it's. I wasn't sure what to expect of them when I first went because it was a very new concept to me. And honestly, I mean, it's a pretty cool spot. I know some people that go and watch races at F1 arcades. I've been scared of the simulators they have there because I just don't ever want to see have friends watch me race. But you can do all of that. You can just kind of soak up, the atmosphere if there's a race on. But even if there's not a race on, from my understanding, they're all geared towards basically just being as F1 kind of nutty as you can get, and you can just completely absorb yourself in that. So my experience was kind of cool. I was only in there for about an hour. I'm not sure if Laurence was there longer, but seemed like an interesting place to go.
The opening ceremony there. So, it was all really brand new at the time. And we were just talking about this actually, talking to our producer about this, and it's a bit like Top Golf is a good kind of comparison. So you have something to do while you're socializing and drinking. So, you can have a drink and then you slot yourself into a little simulator. I think they're usually like 3 or 4 lap races. I'm sure you can do more if you're a pro, but it's nice, short, sharp, kind of like dose of Formula One, in a very arcadey style thing. So everyone can drive and race. Doesn't matter what your level is, Nate. You can get in there and go. Yeah. And
Same
so
as Top Golf.
I thought it was good fun. It was
Well, my level's also low in Top Golf.
yeah, well, I mean, but it's it's a cool night out. So I'm sure Vegas will do it properly as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity and experience for fans here, especially as the sport continues to grow and expand in the United States, and especially for those fans who are going to make the journey from all over the country and world to attend the Las Vegas Grand Prix in 2025 and beyond. So pretty cool viewing opportunity there in Las Vegas. But Monaco is our focus, your all's focus this weekend. Have so much fun. Thank you for your time. Can't wait to see all your great analysis post-race. We'll break it all down next week. Cheers, guys.